We've been really busy. I'm sure you guys can pick up on that since our last conference. So many of you have seen me present PhoneGap integration with Alpha before, I'm sure. But you know, that was always really, really difficult for developers that weren't used to the native SDKs. So Selwyn came to me and said, Bob, we got to integrate this right into the product. We got to make this really, really simple for people. And so we've integrated PhoneGap build right into the product. And I think this is huge because it makes building PhoneGap apps, which are native apps, and these are running natively on your iOS devices, Android or Windows phone. And we just make it completely simple to do. And so that means you can experiment with it. And so I think it's kind of a big deal. So our objective here was just to make it as simple as possible, you know, to build, test, and deploy PhoneGap applications right from within Alpha anywhere. And this all came out of work from PhoneGap. Now, PhoneGap started out as an open source project that Adobe ended up acquiring. And PhoneGap lets you build for actually a lot of different platforms. And they have a command line driven interface if you use their native tools. So this is PhoneGap.com. You can go there. You can see what they're all about. And what we've done is implemented PhoneGap Build. So PhoneGap Build is a service that actually builds PhoneGap apps in the cloud. Now, PhoneGap itself is everything that you do in PhoneGap utilizes a plugin to get to the native functionality. So what PhoneGap is really is it's a bridge, hence the PhoneGap. It's a bridge between native and JavaScript. That's what it provides for us. So it lets us talk to native functionality through these native plugins. And we can do that in PhoneGap Build, what is supported is Android, iOS, and Windows Phone 8. Right here you can see these are the what they call their native plugins, but there's a whole bunch of third-party plugins, and we've integrated most of the popular ones into the product, and we always are adding to it. And if there's ever a third-party plugin that we don't support, just let us know, and it's real easy for us to add that stuff in. Here you can see the different platform guides that PhoneGap itself supports, all the different Amazon, Fire OS, Android, BlackBerry, Firefox, and so on. But PhoneGap Build itself only supports the three that I previously mentioned. So, you know, Adobe realized they had a problem with, you know, it was difficult for people to use PhoneGap because you had to install the native SDKs on your device. So if you wanted to build an iOS app, you had to have Xcode, you had to have a Mac, you had to install all those tools, you had to build that app in Xcode. And so it was difficult. And Android, the same thing, and Windows and so on. So what they did was they built PhoneGap Build. So this is a build service in the cloud. The thing that's really cool about it is that they also built an API. So the API let us talk to PhoneGap Build directly from within Alpha. And that's what I was able to implement. So PhoneGap lets us build these native applications. We can just use all the techniques that everybody knows here, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. You know, that's how you build your app. And you can communicate to these plugins just through that JavaScript bridge. So we're going to take a look at an app right now. I'm going to jump right into the builder, and we'll take a look at a simple PhoneGap application. Now this code, I've released this component. If you look at wherever your Alpha directory is, wherever you've got Alpha installed, there's a PhoneGap directory in there. There's an examples directory. Then under 1, this is the component, PG example 1. And that's the one we'll be playing with right now. So if you actually have Alpha on your machine right now, you can just follow right along. Let me just transition over to Parallels. Okay. I'm going to start out by just showing you what this thing is going to look like. So we'll bring it up right here in working preview. And, well, actually, let me bring it in live preview. Okay. So this application, all we're going to do, it's a very simple app. It's going to just show off some of the native functionality. We're going to use a native beep. The phone will vibrate. We'll bring up a native alert instead of a JavaScript alert. A native confirmation, native prompt. It will kick on the flashlight if the device has any kind of a flash. And well, one of the cool things we're going to do is we're going to be able to scan in an ISBN code from a book, submit that to, we're going to submit that to Apple's store and say, does this book exist there? And if it does, it's going to send us back all the information about the book. So and we've got a couple of other buttons on the bottom that will, one that shows us some help about the application, and another one, this iTunes info, that once we scan in, and we're using a barcode scanner here, the ISBN code, this page will update with the information if there's something available. Which reminds me, I'm going to need a book that's in my briefcase. Brett, there's a JavaScript book in there, if you could, or just bring that case up and I'll get it out. Why don't I just, let's see if I can just show you this app running, and then we'll get into how it was made, because that's always kind of exciting. Yeah, thanks. So we're using AirPlay here, so you can see my phone. And I'm not quite sure if I have this one installed, but if I don't, we'll build it. So that one I don't have installed. So what I'm going to do right here is we'll build this app. So I'm going to do this really quickly, but I will explain exactly what I'm doing. So in this component, I don't even need it open. I can jump into, let's see, the PhoneGap app builder here. Now in this case, let's see, okay, oh, there's example one. So I have built this thing before. So we're going to say, and I'll do this really quickly, I'm going to log into PhoneGap build. So that's what my credentials are up here. I'm going to say go ahead and build this for Android and iOS. This is our component that we're going to use. I will go through this in a little bit more detail. Let's see, that all looks good. So I'm going to just go ahead and see if we can get this to fit on the screen. Yeah. Save and upload. So this is the integration part here. Now we're talking, so it's going to verify that it can find the PhoneGap service, the build service. It seems to be going slow. Oh, there it goes. And so now it realizes that there's a previous build of this up on PhoneGap build, so it's going to do an update. So it's going to take the component. It's going to take all the HTML and JavaScript, everything that's associated with that component, zip it all up. It's going to upload it to the PhoneGap build service. And then once it does, we'll get a response back that will show us the fact that the app is up there now. And then the service itself takes some time to build the native application. So in my case, it's going to build both the Android and the iOS build. And they can build independently. Once that's done, you have a couple of options. One, you can just scan in a QR code that will display that has the actual application, and it will install it on your, and you typically install it on a test device first. So I've got a profile here that's my development profile that lets us, we can have up to 100 devices that we can just test on for development. It's very slow today, I don't really know why. So the question is, what happens if you have more than one component? You're going to base your application on one component, and then anything you would need to. Oh, sorry. Anything you need to, you could dynamically, load stuff, but so bear with me here. I don't know what's going on there. Unmirror. Okay. There we go. Sorry, this network is just a little slow. So right now it's communicating with the PhoneGap build service, and it's pulling up all my applications that I have there. And I'm not really sure why it's so slow, but there it is. So if you look, one of those apps, the one that has app ID of 1121065, that's the one we're talking about. You can see that the builds are pending right now. Looks to me like the PhoneGap build service is running really, really slow right now, because those should have built already. And then you can see the iOS build completed. And what it's doing is there's a timer in here that it will check every 15 seconds. It knows it's supposed to have an Android build also. And when it completes, the button will change to complete. So I'm going to go ahead right now, and we'll just click on that complete under iOS, and let's see if we can bring this back up here. Now, okay, good. Sorry, this gets a little confusing here. Let's say no. So there's my QR code. Now we're going to go ahead and we'll go ahead and scan in this code. And it should ask me if I'd like to install it, and I'll say yep. And you should see that come in. So here we can see the app now loading on my phone. Again, the network is slow, so that would normally be pretty quick. Yeah, you can actually. The limitation you have here is that the iOS devices that you want to test on need to be provisioned. So the app needs to be, oh, sorry about all these things that come in here. So yeah, if the app is provisioned for testing, you can distribute it. Sure. Just remember, you've got so many devices that you can use, but people could be literally all over the world as long as they're provisioned for it. I'm going to go into that not tomorrow, the day after. I'll be talking about provisioning devices and how to set up your test environment and stuff like that. Boy, I'd be better off going through my wireless. I can't go through wireless and do this sharing, so that's why we're doing what we're doing here. So just bear with me, I'm sorry. Aperion, I will, yeah, sure, while we're waiting. So one of the things we've done is we've integrated Aperion integration right into this. So Aperion allows you to manage your apps. They'll distribute your apps. You can say, I only want to distribute this to my sales team or whatever, and manage it, handles updates and all that stuff. So I should turn off notifications. It shouldn't be, because I'm only using AirPlay for these two things,
How much weight does PhoneGap usually add to the application?
The question is, how much weight does it add?
Like file size?
Well, it really depends on the plugins that you use. Previous versions of PhoneGap used to load the whole boat up, everything that you used. It doesn't do that anymore. So it only loads up whatever plugins you really want. So, it's not incredibly heavyweight. So anyway, can you guys? Oh, I turned hydration on this. Sorry. I don't know why it dropped out there. Bear with me, technical issues. Here it comes. I'll explain what's happening here in just a second. Just wanted to show you this. I should have had installed on my phone before I stepped up here. Okay, finally. So this is a native alert that just came up, and it's telling us a little bit about the environment. Oh, look at that. Well, you can see it here. I don't know why AirPlay's, yeah. Oh, you want me to plug in with the, yeah, I guess. I mean, oh. There it is. So this is telling us just a little bit about the platform that we're running on here. So we see it's iOS, the versions 8.0.2, the device model, and the PhoneGap version 3.6.3. That's the latest. So yeah, there's some huge delay going on. I don't really know why. Oh, there it sort of goes.
See, it's like Siri.
So,
I'm scared when
so what do you want to do? Do you want to?
If you plug this to the bottom, you put this in here.
Sorry, technical difficulties, folks.
And give me a
Tell me if it shows up.
Yeah, it's there. It's there. And it's instant.
Okay. All right, so let's see what we can do here. So this will be a native beep. Except I don't, oh, I have mute on. Something, oh, my volume's down to nothing. Come on. Beep. It's a native alert. Now this is not. This is a so this is a JavaScript alert. So you notice you'll see index.html there. So the native alert, you don't see that index.html, and then this is I'm bringing this up just to show you the difference. And a native confirmation box. So here you can prompt a user for something, and in this case, now this is kind of cool because I'm adaptive. So I said, oh, I'm running on an iOS device, so I'm going to award this guy 100 shares of Apple. If you were on an Android device, you'd get 100 shares of Google. So I'll show you how I did that.
Can I have that link to that app again?
This is the flashlight, so you should be able to see my. That goes on for like 3 seconds, and then this is the. Now we're going to bring up the scanner, and I've got a book in here. Yeah, if anybody has another book. Oops, sorry. Now I'm going to tangle it up here. Okay, so let's see if this book is in the iTunes store. So now it's calling back, and there it goes. So it found it. So that was kind of cool. So thanks. So it looked up the ISBN code, found a match, brought back all the information as JSON, and then this is displayed using Alpha's templating within it, and the thing that's neat about this is there's also multiple templates, because some of these books have got a rating. So you can see rating is 3.5 on this one, but not all of them do. So I use a separate template for the JSON that comes back. And I'll show you how we did that. So if we look at iTunes info, that'll come up. Now the button that says View in the iTunes app, so if I tap this button, because Apple has implemented a custom URL scheme, it goes and it launches iTunes, and it will bring up more information about that particular book. So we've got this integration between our PhoneGap app and an iOS app, Apple's app that's running right on the phone, and that was very, very simple to do. So I can jump right back into my app. Notice I don't lose state, so the app knows what's going on. And also the help here, this is all HTML help. And then there's also a button to go to the alpha site, and when I tap on that, it brings up what's called the in-app browser. So rather than going out to Safari, blowing us out of our app, we're in our own app. We've just brought up a website within the app, and it's fully functional, and then I can just bring it on down, right? So that's kind of cool. So anyway, that's the native functionality that we're going to go for here. I'm going to disconnect this now. Hopefully nothing blows up, right? Okay. Are the screens back? Okay, good. All right. So you can see I've got a bunch of different PhoneGap apps up here that I've published through PhoneGap Build. So let's go back to the component itself and just take a quick look at how this component was built. Now, the example code that I wrote, I tried to show you guys what I think is the right way to write these apps. There isn't a right way and a wrong way. You learn from experience how to build this stuff. And everybody has a different technique that they use. And as with anything in programming, there's millions of ways to do the same thing. So this is my technique that I used when I wrote this. And then that was back in January. And I'd probably still use this technique today. So what I typically do, if we go and we look at these controls here, there are certain controls, for example, the help and also the iOS information that we're bringing back. So that's information that I'm going to probably code up in HTML. I don't like to embed HTML in my components. It's just a technique I have. I don't really like to do it. So I like to handle all that stuff through JavaScript. So what I'll do is I'll use a free-form container because that reminds me, oh, that's HTML. You can use a label. You can use almost anything that accepts HTML in terms of the control. But if we look at this panel card here, panel card 3, we'll see this free-form container in here, and we go look at the layout, you'll see, boy, there's nothing there. There's a div with an ID called app help. And I'll do this, I do this quite often. So I like to put all of the HTML that I'm using in my app in one place, so I always know where to look for it. I don't have to go out and look at all the controls and say, oh, where the heck is that? And you'll see that here too in panel card 2. Same thing. So this is for the iTunes info. I just set up a div, give it a name, and I'm going to populate it later. So that's the way I set it all up. And you'll see that in almost all of the components I build, I use this technique. So how do you populate it? Well, if you go to the client-side events, and in this case, I'm only using one. So uninitialized complete. So after that component is all initialized, it fires after the component has been completely initialized. All the HTML has been rendered, okay? and it doesn't fire on any other callbacks. So this is the perfect time to populate those divs, and that's what we're going to do here. So you'll notice that I'm setting the inner HTML on these divs. I'm just calling a JavaScript function. One, load default iTunes info, and then another called load app help. So the beauty of this is now we can go to our JavaScript functions, and unfortunately they don't quite fit here, do they? Well, let's see if I can do this. There we go. So that is a little better. Okay, so let's go take a look at, these are my functions here. So here we'll go look at our load default iTunes info. And so this function, here you can see I'm building an array. This is all the HTML that's going to be in the default iTunes info area. It's just plain HTML, and then I use join to bring that all together. And I just go ahead and return that HTML. So that's what's being stuffed into that div. And load app help is the same technique. And so here you can see all of the help. And that gets populated one time on this initialization. So and another thing to note here is that because everything was HTML in the help file, you remember that button that called and launched Alpha software in the in-app browser. So I had to do that through HTML. And I do that right down in here. So you can see I just bring in a button. I throw one of my own classes on it because I styled everything the way I wanted it to be built. And then I used an on-touch end event so that I didn't get any of the click delays or anything like that. And then I just call this method the launch in-app browser. That's a native PhoneGap. Oh, that's a third party. Oh, actually, no, it's a native plugin. And at this point, we're just going to go ahead and bring up Alpha's the Alpha software site. So that's just a kind of a cool little technique to know about. Let's go look at the some of the other controls in here. The beep is really straightforward. This has actually been exposed through Action JavaScript. So our intention was to expose a lot of the PhoneGap functionality through Action JavaScript, and I've just been so busy that I haven't really been able to do a heck of a lot. So there's only, I think, 3 or 4 things that we've actually been able to expose. Working with these PhoneGap plugins is very, very easy. I'll show you that. So it typically is a minimal amount of JavaScript, and so you don't feel like you need to wait for us to implement Action JavaScript. It's easy enough to do. So let's look at what I'm doing here on inline JavaScript. So let's see. So here, this is another technique I use all the time. So here you'll notice I say if, and I'm using the dialog object. So the dialog object I use it's just like a container for me. And then I created an app vars object. So anything that I'm going to create, if it's going to be properties or other objects or anything that I need as a programmer for this component, I'm going to throw in app vars. Because I control that. So that's my object. There isn't an alpha object called app var. So I've created my own. Then I've got a debug property. And so if it's true, if it's enabled, then this console.log will display on within a browser. So to debug these apps is a little bit tricky. As you can imagine, you're going to have this app running on your phone, and you go, okay, well, if there's a JavaScript error or something's wrong, how are you going to know about it? Well, this is where the native debuggers become incredibly helpful. So as you notice, I'm running on a Mac. I'm running under Parallels. Safari on the Mac supports debugging of PhoneGap apps. So I can see everything that's going on. And console log, in this case, this would just print out on my console log in my debugger. And if I have time, I'll show you that. If you're developing on Android, as long as you're running KitKat 4.4.2, the Chrome debugger is supported also. So and that will run under Windows. So that's really good to know about. And my recommendation has always been, if you're serious about this stuff, you really, the Mac is a great development environment because it runs Parallels really nicely. It runs, I've got Windows 8.1 on one of my Macs, and then this is Windows 7. And I'll tell you, it runs great. I haven't had any problems. So I get the best of both worlds. I can use the native tools when I need them for any iOS stuff that I need to do. And I can use the debugger, and nothing really gets in my way. So anyway, let's just keep moving on here. Then we're going to take a look at this notification. So this is using Action JavaScript. It's just saying beep. Under iOS, that beep count could be 5, and it's only going to beep once. That's a limitation of PhoneGap, but in that case, that's what we did. We can look at the JavaScript that was generated here, and you can see how simple it is. So, so those are those two actions, and the first is we're taking a look at, in this case, we're looking to make sure that the navigator, the notification plugin is in fact installed. If it is installed, then it'll beep. Otherwise, it's going to get an alert and say that the plugin's not installed. I did that so that if you tried to fire this thing off in working preview or even live preview, it's going to just tell you, sorry, there's no PhoneGap plugins installed. So keep in mind when you're developing this stuff, none of the PhoneGap plugins are going to work in live preview because it's not on the device. So it needs to be there. I'm running out of time really quickly here, so I'm going to have to, unfortunately, keep moving. Let me just show, I'm going to move fast. So I'm going to skip over a bunch of stuff that I really wanted to show you. I do want to look at this native confirmation because this is kind of neat. There's some good techniques in here. So let's see what we've got. I know the inline JavaScript is going to just do my debug, the same thing you saw before. And this is kind of neat because in this particular instance, notice what I'm doing. So the notification type is confirmed. The dialog title is we have a winner. The dialog message is a function. So get confirm message. Because this is where I want to say, well, what are we running on? Is this on an iOS device or is this on an Android device? So we're going to generate the message dynamically rather than just having some string that we just plug in there. So we're going to call this JavaScript function, and it's going to generate the message for us. And then we can see the callback that we call. So this is very common in a PhoneGap app. You make a call, and then you have a success and a fail function. Very, very typical. I'll show you that in another example. So again, we can look at this JavaScript if you'd like. You can see this is a really good learning tool as you're starting to come up to speed with, well, how do I use this stuff? You can see navigator.notification.confirm. That is calling a native PhoneGap function. That will, if you look at PhoneGap's documentation, that's what you're going to see. So that's code that we're generating for you there. So I wanted to. Go back to that. I just forgot what the get confirm message, sorry. So in our JavaScript functions, let's look at what get confirm message is all about. Okay, so that is this function right here. So you'll notice that, so we define these two messages, okay, and then we identify the stock symbol right here with a call to another function called isItIOS. And so this function is right above us here. And you'll notice that all we're doing there is looking at a5.flags.isAndroid. So there is this object, this flags object that Alpha keeps track of. And you can get a whole lot of information from that. If you just take a look at, there's a whole bunch of different properties in there that sort of identify, well, what am I running on? There's other ways to do it, but that's the way I decided to do it here. And so in this case, this underbar stock symbol is going to be set to either Apple, AAPL, or Google, based on whether or not we're running on iOS. address, and then we just return that message. That's what goes into that string. So just kind of a cool little technique there. Something else I just wanted to quickly show you was when we start in these JavaScript functions, you can see like right up top here, I define these app globals. This is where I set up that app vars object. So right here, you could think of these like global variables, but remember in JavaScript, you don't want to pollute the global namespace because you never really know who's using what. It's kind of a free-for-all. So I always like to set up some sort of object that I use as a container object. I like to attach it to the dialog object. I know you're all wondering, why isn't it called the UX.object instead of the dialog object? Well, that's just legacy stuff. You know, the UX is a sort of a derivative of the dialog, but so that that's what that's all about. And then you can see from there I set up this debug variable where I've set as false, but if I set it to true, it would print all that stuff out on my console logs. And then I set up some these are essentially global variables that I need, like the scanner result and this message, because I pass them around in the app. So I do it right here, set everything up the way I want, set my templates up right at the start, and now I'm good to go. And then I jump into all my different functions that I'm using within this component. Okay, does anybody have any questions on this component itself before I jump, because I need to jump into the PhoneGap app builder. And if you do, you can ask me later on. So I'm going to jump, so we've defined this component, we've set it up the way we wanted, and now we want to turn it into a PhoneGap app. So how do we do it? So you notice that, well, let me go back. There's this PhoneGap app builder button right here. It's from the web projects control panel. When you go ahead and open that up, right now it understands that this is an existing project because I've published it once before. But if I hadn't, it'd be a new project. It would ask me to enter in my username and my password. These are my PhoneGap build credentials. Now you can set up a PhoneGap build account. It's a free account for one app. So you can, or you can pay $10 a month and have up to 25 apps that are up there. And if you only have one app, you can keep deleting it, and you can play that game. But for $10 a month, it's a pretty good service, you know. So that's what I do. In these PhoneGap, the service timeouts, these thresholds here, when we're talking to the PhoneGap service, we have to say, well, how long do you want me to wait before I time out, before something happens? There were problems with PhoneGap build early on, and so we needed to set these thresholds. You can just leave them at default. Most of the time they're going to work. If you see something weird going on, like, I don't know, for some reason it can't log in or something like that, you know, you can set this threshold right here to something longer. Then the build platforms, what are you going to build for? Android or iOS or all of them, and Windows Phone. So whatever you want to build for. And we'll talk about how to set up your provisioning profiles and your credentials up on PhoneGap Build in a couple of days. Next thing is this initial UX component. So this is like, what component do you want to use to base your app on? In our case, it's that PG example 1. We're going to take all of the code, everything that that you built, and we build that all into one package and upload that whole package. If you click on generate the PhoneGap asset files, what that means is it will generate this component again. If you made a change to it, it would automatically be checked. So if I had made any change to PG example 1, that would have just been checked. Additional files. In this case, there is an additional file it's used. It's the background image on that main page. So you need to go ahead and specify, yeah, well, that's part of my bundle. Go ahead and load it up. You could say generate the image resource files. So what are those? Well, that would be your master icon if you're going to use splash screens, or now they're called launch images. You can go ahead and do that here. This saves you an unbelievable amount of time because all of the different devices have different size icons, different size splash screens, and so on. So when you specify, yeah, I want to use, you know, this is my master icon here, and you typically would pick the biggest So for the platform that you're building, pick the biggest image, and we'll just scale it on down. So let's say, okay, I want to use that. We're going to go ahead and just generate all the images that you need in your application bundle to support, all the different devices. In this case, I've said to enable Aperion Ease integration. So that's going to allow me to upload the APK or the IPA file, in this case for Android or for iOS, to Aperion's database. So now that app would be available through Aperion, and I'll show you that in a sec. Here because I've enabled the Aperion integration, you got to plug in your credentials. So your Aperion account login, your password, and then they use multiple servers based on your geographic location. Whether if you're in Europe, this is going to be a different location here. Then you have to go ahead and start assigning some information about your app. So your app ID, typically this is like a reverse DNS name. So com.alphasoftware.example1. That will be the example1 is the name of my app, and the other identifies ultimately identifies what's called the bundle ID. Your version, what you want to call it. You can plug in the app author email. What version of PhoneGap do you want to use? We support all the different 3.0 versions. 3.6.3 is the latest. You could say, what device do you want to target? And here you could say, I only want to target phones, I want to target tablets, or I don't care. You could specify what orientation you want. You want landscape and portrait, or just landscape. You can do that here. Here you specify the allowed origin policy. So if we're going to go out and start talking to web services or whatever, where are they? In this case, I put in a asterisk. I'm saying, let me talk to everything that's out there. But you can be very specific in terms of how you, of what you allow to communicate with your app. This debug option, the PhoneGap supports this thing called a winery debugger, and it's really, I think it's fairly useless. So you can see it's essentially a cloud-based debugger, and you can see kind of what's going on, but you can't really, you don't see a lot of the JavaScript stuff that you really want to see, and you can enable it, but I'm not a big fan of it. You can set some options for a pre-rendered icon and some other things, and also in the Android side of things, you can specify, well, the phone has to have a minimum SDK of this. As you can see, there's a whole lot of options. And, without this builder, you have to hand code all this stuff. So, this builder is incredibly, makes it really easy. A lot of times you just can go with the defaults. You don't have to play around. But if you want to fine tune it, you can. So then for an Android device, you typically have to enable certain features. You have to say, well, I'm going to use camera features, or I'm going to use network features, and so on. That's only on Android. And then down in here, we start specifying the plugins that you're going to use. So this app uses the device plugin, it uses the in-app browser plugin, it uses notification, vibration, the barcode scanner. Notice under third-party plugins, and you'll see there's a whole bunch of those. And we also are using the flashlight plugin, and I always include the status bar plugin because under iOS 7 and up, the status bar essentially goes away, and your app flows into the status bar, and that was by design. But if you just turn the status bar plugin on, it will look like an old iOS 6 app, and a lot of people like that. And so you can control that there. So now we have all of our options set, and we can say, so I can now just say save and upload, and you already saw that process. I'm not going to do that again because it took an awfully long time. Or you can just click on Manage My PhoneGap Apps, and it will go out, get all your apps from PhoneGap Build, and you can delete things, you can do whatever you want there. This is where the documentation is. So here I'm going to say open the documentation in a browser. So notice that URL, downloads.alphasoftware.com/Cordova documentation, alpha-PhoneGap-doc.pdf. This is really extensive documentation. I really spent a lot of time on this. There's a lot of code examples in here. This everything that I've talked about with this app is all documented in here. I mean, I go into really, really incredible detail in this documentation about everything that we've talked about and much more. And I really try to explain why I do certain things and all of that. I really put a lot of effort into the documentation. The thing that's really cool about this is if you bring it up in iBooks on your iPad, it's going to look great. So that's, I've got it on my iPad here, and let's see if that might show. Well, I'm not gonna tie us up with that. But if you want, you can just load this doc right into iBooks on. If you have any iOS device, and you can use it. It's great reference material. I'm constantly updating this as I can. There's just an awful lot to document, and so anyway, that's where the documentation is. Getting sort of towards the end of this talk, and I'd like to open it up for some questions, but there's one other thing that I really wanted to mention here, and I didn't get to explain. This is this URL for AJAX callbacks. This particular application does not make any calls to an alpha server. What you just saw, we are communicating with web services, which you can certainly do, and I'm going to tomorrow speak about an application that I built for the World Cup, 2014 World Cup, that only uses outside web services, to get JSON data. It works with Flickr. It gets photos from Flickr. It works with the Google Maps API and all of that. It never talks to an alpha server, and this is the same situation. However, most of your apps will, and so what you need to do is you need to understand that when you publish a component that's going to make a callback, you've got to plug in the URL for your callback here. You have to specify your protocol. So you're using HTTP, HTTPS. You need to specify where's my server. If you're publishing into a directory, you got to specify that directory also. Okay, so that's kind of important. I actually have a really simple component that I can show you. So this is actually a good thing to test out. So if you're ever having trouble talking to your server, you say, well, geez, my PhoneGap app I can't seem to communicate with my server. Do something really, really simple. And so this is about as simple as it's going to get. And let's go ahead and fire this thing off. And so all it has on it is a button. And then when you do the button, you click the button, you get a callback. And so it's going to send back information about the device. Now, since we're running on a desktop browser, it's just sending back, it's not telling us too much. But in a PhoneGap app, that would tell us a lot of stuff, about the device that we're on and everything else. And you'd see it, say, okay, that works. So, and so this is really, really simple. If we take a look at the click event here, we're doing an AJAX callback. We're calling an internal XBasic function. Show browser flags is the name of it. We'll go take a look at that. So we'll go look at our XBasic functions here. And here's our show browser flags. So in this case, we're just doing a var to JSON of e._underbar browser flags. And that's all we need to do. So you could just do an alert if you wanted, because it's all in this callback. You could return, just in this case, notice what I'm returning is this alert, and then I've plugged in this variable called e._underbar the browser flags. But you could just say alert, I'm talking to your server, and that would be good. So if we were to jump into the PhoneGap builder here, okay, this is what I wanted to show you right here. This is the URL for the AJAX callback. So you need to know, like, okay, on my development machine, well, what's my IP address, And in this case, we're using HTTP. That was the URL when I tested. That was my IP address of my development server at the time. So how do I go ahead and determine that? Just come in here and type in launch the command prompt and ipconfig. That'll show you your IP address right here, so you can just use that if you want. So actually, that looks about right. And let's see, what else might you want? Oh, project properties, this is something everybody always forgets about. And so in this case, notice jQuery core, it says load internal version, load jQuery UI. Don't need it. Now I'm not even using it. And everybody always forgets about this. So just turn these off because you're loading up your app with JavaScript you just don't need. So, be careful there. Take a look at what everything's set for here. Because otherwise you'll look at your bundle and go, boy, why is that thing so big? Well, it's loading up all this JavaScript that you just don't need. The other thing I wanted to just point out to you, if you go to a web development server here, here's you can see what port you're on. That's another thing you have to specify if you're doing those for that callback. Like that would have failed in my app builder because I didn't specify the port. It's going to go to the default of port 80. So in this case, I'm using port 81. Right here, you can see that. And the other thing that you need to just look at is when you go to publish this, just to verify, well, where the heck am I publishing it? In this case, notice target folder isn't there, so it's just going to go into the A5 web root. But if you had that, say, in test or something like that, you got to put that in that URL within the within this builder. So right here, for example, I would need to do that. Oops, didn't take it. Why not? Oh, sorry, I have to tell it to generate the files so before I can edit it. And now that would work correctly on port 81, so I could go ahead and save it. If you ever want to look at what we're generating, you can see the PhoneGap build XML right here. All of this is the stuff that you would have to hand code. Notice all about your icons, splash screens, plugins, everything. All that stuff we're generating for you. You can come in here and hand tweak this. Let's go look at where it is. So in the, you'll see this PhoneGap projects directory, and the default was the name of my project. In this www directory, these are all the assets for your PhoneGap application. So in this case, we'll come into, well, let's say, look at all files, sorry. And so here we can see the index HTML that we generated. That's going to load your component. Here's the config XML file. So you could actually come in here and edit this thing if you wanted to. Well, I just launched my browser, but bring it up in your editor. You could edit this. And so if there was some third-party plugin that you wanted and wasn't in our builder, you could actually go ahead and do that. So, Dave, how about questions? Can does anybody have any questions? Got to do this quickly.
What's the limitation of the NFC in near-field communication?
NFC is only supported on Android, so but the plugin is there, so you can use it. Yeah.
I'm going to be adding phone support, mobile support to my existing web app. Should I create a new project, or how did that work together with the desktop or with the web side of things?
You can actually take essentially an app that's a web app and turn it into a PhoneGap app. So it's a native app. You don't even need to use PhoneGap functionality to do it. You just got to be careful, you want to load up as many assets as you can locally, because
I want to make specific, forms and stuff for the web, for the mobile.
Yeah.
But I want them to, use the same login system and that kind of thing.
So the question is, can I take a web application and turn it into a PhoneGap app? And the answer is yeah. Sure. We just need to know about that. How do we communicate with your server? And the login component has to be handled through the UX login. But other than that, I don't think there's any restrictions there. Yeah.
Three quick questions. I didn't catch the part about if you have a UX with an embedded UX, you just publish the basic primary UX? Is that all you have to do?
You publish the primary UX. It's going to do a callback to load the.
When you do the PhoneGap build?
Yeah. That's what you want to do. You want to do a callback to get that to get the embedded UX. Yes.
Now, as far as where does XBasic go? When you do your PhoneGap build, where does XBasic go?
XBasic is always going back to the server. So that's why you've got to, even with that button where we saw, remember the component that I showed you, that test one, that had the button with the XBasic function that we defined within the component builder? So you've got to publish that component to your app server because it's going to make a callback there.
Okay, so for
And-
the AX or whatever you did,
Yeah.
it's going to the
Yep, that's the way it works.
If you lose connectivity, if you have your PhoneGap app and you lose connectivity to your server, you still have the X-facing functionality or still not?
Okay, so yeah, no, so good. That's a good question. So what happens if if all of a sudden you lose your connectivity and you're going to make these callbacks? What do? I'm going to cover that tomorrow's session when I get into the World Cup app, because I go and test to see whether or not the server is actually online, and I monitor the state of the device the connectivity. And if you look in our phone in the documentation that I referenced, it's all in there. Okay. Yeah.
Real quick, if you're not making any callbacks, do you need a application server license number?
Okay, so the question is, if you're not making callbacks, do you need an app server license number? No, you don't even need an app server. Because if you're talking outside services, you can just do it. Yeah, you don't need, yeah. So, I mean, that's one of the real, I mean, Alpha is such an incredible system when you think about it. You can, if you want to just talk to outside services, you can. And you get all this, this functionality that we've built in this PhoneGap builder is phenomenal because you can put this stuff together very quickly. I mean, in a day you can build a really great app that's communicating with. It could be communicating with Parse or any of these services that are out there. So it's pretty amazing. Yeah. Three. Yeah. If you just go into the builder itself and go ahead and pick the latest build. So if you went in and say, oh, I want to use 3.6.3, it'll just do it. And then resubmit it to PhoneGap build. Yeah.